Pumpkin spice has become a very popular flavor over the last 10 years, and it's available really in two forms: a dry powder, which is just spices, or as a syrup. And you can make the syrup at home, either putting those spices in or using pumpkin, mashed pumpkin, either from a can or from a baked pumpkin. But there's another way to make pumpkin syrup. Hi, it's Dan with EUJUICERS.COM, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make pumpkin syrup using a juicer and fresh pumpkin pulp. Now I'm going to be using a horizontal juicer like this Sauna 727 here. Horizontal means the ingredients are processed in a horizontal direction, but if you have a vertical juicer, don't worry, I've got you covered. Now the reason I'm choosing a horizontal juicer is because horizontal juicers often come with what's called a blank screen. That's this guy right here, as opposed to a juicing screen. Let me explain how this works. This is a typical juicing screen. When I put the pumpkin in, it's going to crush the pumpkin into a juicy pulp. If I use the juicing screen, it'll push that pulp against this screen, making a cup of juice, and then it will push out the dry pulp. Now this blank screen, also called a homogenizing screen, doesn't have a sieve on it. Everything is going to get crushed together, and then that juicy pulp will be ejected into the pulp container. And that's going to be really handy for this recipe, as you'll see in a moment. So here's the ingredients I'm going to put in this pumpkin spice syrup. And I'll tell you the ratios here with these three main ingredients and talk a little bit about each one. Starting out, it's a basic syrup recipe, which means 1 part water to 1 part sweetener. You can use different types of sweeteners. I'm going to use white sugar, but you could also use brown sugar or maple syrup. I've tried all three this week with real distinctive results with each. White sugar doesn't add any extra flavor, it just adds sweetness. So that means you'll taste more of the pumpkin, you'll taste more of the spices, and it will also be a lighter color and a slightly thinner syrup, which is great for beverages like coffee. If you put in brown sugar, that's going to result in a darker syrup, of course, a slightly thicker syrup, but it's going to add that distinctive brown sugar caramel overtone. That means it's going to cover up slightly the flavor of the pumpkin and the flavor of the spices. So you might want to adjust the ratios of spices in that. And finally, with maple syrup, that's going to add a strong, distinctive flavor, that distinctive maple flavor. In fact, I would call that result not even pumpkin spice syrup, but I'd call it maple pumpkin spice syrup, which isn't a bad thing, especially if you're using it for something like pancakes or waffles. It can be really good. Just keep in mind it's going to cover up a lot of these flavors, so you might want to dial it back a little, the amount of maple syrup, or you could cook it longer, let it simmer longer to bring out some of those flavors. So what are the amounts I'm going to be using in this recipe? Well, again, like I said, it's 1-to-1 water to sugar. So I'm going to put in about a cup of water and a cup of sugar. Then you'll want to use about a half amount of this, 1/2 ratio of the pumpkins. I'm not going to use all these pumpkins, but I'll process them all, and then I'll take out about a 1/2 cup of the juicy pumpkin pulp. Now the spices, I've got 4 spices here. It's the traditional pumpkin spice spices, although sometimes there's a 5th allspice. You'll see that in some recipes. Starting from this side here, I've got cloves. These are whole cloves. Cloves are strong, but since these are whole and they'll be filtered out in the last step of the cooking process, it's okay to use a lot of these. I'll use a full teaspoon of the cloves. Next up is nutmeg. That's also really strong, and because this is a powder, it's going to dissolve into the syrup. So in this case, you want to cut back, dial it back a little. I'll use about a 1/2 teaspoon of the nutmeg. Next up is cinnamon. You could put in cinnamon sticks if you want. You could put 3 or 4 cinnamon sticks, let them steep, but I'm going to use cinnamon powder. It's going to dissolve into it, but I really like cinnamon, so I'm going to use a full teaspoon or even a heaping teaspoon. And finally, I've got ginger here. I've got fresh ginger. I don't have ginger powder. If I was using ginger powder, I'd do about a 1/2 teaspoon. But because I'm using fresh, I'm going to put in a couple of slices of ginger. You could also grate the ginger and put in about a teaspoon of that. Again, it'll get filtered out at the end, so you don't have to worry about that. So that's what is in it. These are all the ingredients. Now let's move on and I'll tell you how it's made, and after that I'll actually show you how it's made. So here's how I'm going to do this, and you'll see in the pinned to the first comment below the ingredient list and the recipe listed out there. But it's quite simple. I'm just going to add all the ingredients into a pot. That's that cup of water, cup of sugar, everything else. And then you bring it to a boil, And while you're doing that, you want to keep stirring it. You don't want it to burn because that sugar could burn, especially the maple syrup or the brown sugar. Once it hits a boil, turn down the heat. Let it simmer for about 10 minutes. You can even go up to 15-20 minutes. The longer you let it simmer, the more those flavors will go into the syrup. After you're done, you just want to let it cool down. That's probably another 15-20 minutes. Then you'll just strain it into your bottle. You can strain it using a strainer, or you could use a cheesecloth, or you could use a nut milk bag. Sauna makes a good nut milk bag from food grade nylon that we tested this week, and it worked really well. So it's really simple. Now, one thing to keep in mind, if you're using maple syrup and you want that thicker maple pumpkin syrup for pancakes, you might want to let it boil for 5 to 10 minutes. That's going to create a thicker texture. Just to make sure to keep stirring, because that can burn. It can even crystallize, and you'll end up with pumpkin maple candy, which actually doesn't sound bad at all. So that's the recipe. Let's get started. So it's all done, and here's the final result. I let it boil for less than a minute, let it simmer for about 15 minutes, and then it took about another 15-20 minutes to cool down. As you can see, the result is a nice kind of amber, almost orange color. I do want to taste it and also check the consistency. It's kind of thin, which is to be expected. But it really does have a distinct pumpkin flavor. I really taste the pumpkin, but I put in a little more pumpkin than I originally planned. It's quite good. It would be great for like a pumpkin spice latte or even other hot drinks like hot chocolate. I'd be curious to know how you use pumpkin spice. Do you use the powder? Do you use the syrup? What do you use it in? Leave it in the comments below, and I'd like to read that. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed this video. Pumpkin spice syrup made from fresh pumpkin with your juicer. Thanks for watching. I'm Dan with EUJUICERS.COM, and I'll see you next time.